but the majority of my Memorial Day memories do come from the band activity part of it. And if there's one person of whom I am strongly reminded on Memorial Day morning every year, that would be a gentleman named William G. Zimmerman, Jr. Hello, and welcome to episode 62 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of May 26th, 2025. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a band story from a place where the pit means a very different thing, a humbling moment for me, a good humbling moment, a story of band community that might be the whole point of this podcast. And in the trio section, it's Memorial Day weekend, and I have a memory to share. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. Thanks so much for your patience with my little micro episode last week. There's that cliche that goes, life is what happens when you're making other plans. Sometimes in my case, and I'm sure in yours as well, in some form at some time, the cliche really ought to be, life is what happens to your other plans. Something also about mice and men. The only hang-up with making a podcast like this, particularly when it's not even a mom-and-pop operation, since that would imply the involvement of more than one person, is that sometimes it really can seem like you're podcasting into the void. To be clear, over the last nearly 16 months now, I've received lots of feedback, lots of responses, emails, texts, Facebook messages, in-person conversations, homemade merch. You know who you are. But at the same time, one can feel very solo, sitting at a laptop, writing copy, recording it merrily, assembling all the audio bits, generating episode artwork and social media PR blasts. You hope that on Monday mornings, or whenever, folks are listening and getting something out of it, but theater people love the theater in part because the feedback is instantaneous, up or down. With this form of media, the feedback is necessarily not instantaneous. You get the idea of how you're doing very after the fact. No, this is not an announcement about a live BandWagon recording. Boy, is that a level of sophistication, not to mention tech resources, that I may never achieve. Not that I wouldn't put my phone down in the middle of a table with all my friends sitting at it and hit record, but if we're talking about, hey everybody, welcome to BandWagon Live. No. Why am I moaning and groaning about this? Only to set up what's on the way here in this episode. I've got a couple of anecdotes which I am happy to point to as actual evidence that there are folks out there listening and reacting and actually taking action. Unsolicited. I didn't ask anybody to do any of what you're about to hear. No money changed hands, not even a whispered suggestion from me, just people taking some initiative, and it's kind of cool. No, it's very cool. I had this pie-in-the-sky idea about building a little community through band and a podcast. Very lofty goal. Who did I think I was exactly? A famous person with clout? No, indeed. But, if my purpose is to be a conduit, a facilitator, so be it. I accept your terms. So, update your PA announcer copy, and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Indianapolis, Indiana. The AES 500 Festival Parade, part of the 500 Festival that accompanies the Indianapolis 500 motor race, was held on Saturday, May 24th, and featured 14 marching bands, 12 of which came from the state of Indiana. More than 200,000 spectators gather in downtown Indianapolis to watch the parade annually, which also features floats, helium balloons, celebrities, and all 33 Indianapolis 500 drivers, and was telecast nationally this weekend on NBC's Peacock streaming service. Participating bands included the Chartiers Valley Show Band from Bridgeville, Pennsylvania, the Goshen, Indiana High School Crimson Marching Band, the Indianapolis Public Schools All-City Marching Band, the Jimtown High School Marching Jimmies from Elkhart, Indiana, the Belleville, Illinois West High School Marching Maroons, the Eastern Musketeer Brigade from Pekin, Indiana, the New Prairie Marching Cougars from New Carlisle, Indiana, the Northwood, Indiana High School Red Regiment from Napanee, Indiana, the Speedway, Indiana High School 500 Regiment Band, the Warren Central Gold Brigade Marching Band and Color Guard from Indianapolis, the Indiana National Guard's 38th Infantry Division Band, the Centerville, Indiana High School Blue Regiment, the National Band Association Indiana All-Star Band from Zionsville, Indiana, and the Purdue University All-American Marching Band. Dateline, Sahuarita, Arizona, and for heaven's sake, somebody please get in touch with me and correct me on that pronunciation. I probably butchered it, and I apologize in advance. Credit on this story to the writing and reporting of Joel Foster of KGUN in Tucson. After 18 years as conductor of the Green Valley Concert Band, Dr. John Snavely officially stepped down following the band's April 13th concert. Snavely, who played clarinet with the Tucson Symphony Orchestra for over half a century, said, quote, "Honestly, I couldn't do anything else. I was bad at sports, but I started playing my clarinet, and even the guys who were really athletic said, 'Wow, you can do that?'" Snavely was meant to be a one-year interim conductor with the Green Valley Band, while their former director sought a nursing degree. His final concert featured a composition entitled Chapeau, which had been written to mark the occasion by composer Jack Stamp. And here's the explanation for the title. In an interview, Stamp noted Snavely's unique personality and style, remembering the first time he had seen him perform during a performance of Stamp's composition Border Dance. Quote, "When John conducted Border Dance, he came out wearing a sombrero. That's kind of odd for a conductor, but I found out John liked to dress up for all his concerts. Even his granddaughter helped with the costuming." Snavely said that this began long ago. Quote, "When I started Sonoran Winds, I started occasionally wearing a hat, maybe a coat. When I came to Green Valley, I kept that tradition. I'm told half the audience comes to see what I'm going to wear, and the other half comes for the music." The Green Valley Band has appointed Dr. Matt Williams from the University of Arizona as its new conductor. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break and meet you on the other side. Hope you'll stay with me. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, I have a story which is a callback to a previous episode, a callback to a gentleman who has utilized the podcast's heybandwagon@yahoo.com email address before, and an example of the kind of eventuality that optimistic me had hoped might happen as I began this little project early last year. I take no credit for this, apart from maybe providing a vehicle for like-minded band people to connect in whatever ways that can happen. Originally, I imagined that maybe someone might hear about a community band featured in a BandWagon episode and decide to go join. And if that community band was the one that I conduct, that would be a bonus, although a non-mandatory one. Or maybe someone might hear about a crowdfunding effort on behalf of a school band or a desperate plea for help in replacing stolen band instruments and decide to help out. Something like that. So what's happened? What's the story I'm about to tell? Something like that. The two characters in this story are friends of mine, old and new, and they've each indicated that they're okay with letting me tell this story to you. About a month ago, Tom Carboni, who preceded me into and out of the UMass Amherst band by 1 year, sent an email to me and to Lauren Sleva, the middle school band director teaching in Haverhill, Massachusetts. You heard from her during our trio section conversation back in episode 55 at the end of this past March. Tom wrote, in part, quote, "I'm just catching up on my podcast episodes and listened to your interview from a couple weeks ago. As a Haverhill native and resident, I can't help but love what it sounds like Lauren is doing in our middle schools." Tom asked Lauren a few questions about her program that had not come up during the episode 55 interview, and then continued, quote, "Lauren, it is teachers like you that will often keep those kids coming to school, giving them something to look forward to. More importantly, your energy will excite their interest in music and may influence them to keep up with it in college. I believe that it was my involvement in music that helped me build confidence in myself, and I am now leading a group of talented public employees who make a difference. There are a lot of HHS alumni who would give you a hand somehow if needed. Please don't hesitate to email me if I can advocate for your program somehow. By the way, what's a plunger mute cost?" Rob, you have once again found a fantastic story to tell here. Thank you. In a city where not all news is good, this is one that needs to be told. This is what can make a difference for many of our kids. Lauren, you work with some great people at Constantino Middle School and elsewhere." Unquote. Not long after that, Lauren replied, saying, quote, "Hi, Tom. Thanks for reaching out and thank you for your kind words. So sorry for the late reply. I felt like I was fighting for my life trying to get to April break. I'm so happy you like the podcast. I was really looking forward to recording it. Working at Haverhill certainly has its challenges, but I love my students. They work hard and have been achieving more and more each year since I started. To answer a few of your questions, the Constantino Middle School band room is now the technology classroom. I don't mind the stage. We get to practice where we perform. I think a plunger mute would just be a plunger head. Can't be too expensive. We have 5 trumpets and 3 trombones right now. My colleague Matt and I will let you know if we need some extra help with advocacy. It makes a huge difference even when people talk about the program." Unquote. And a few days after that, Tom emailed Lauren again. Quote, "Hi, Lauren. I was thinking you taught at Hunking Middle School, so I dropped a bag of plungers in the office for you. I was looking for larger ones for the bones. Let me know if this size might work for them as well." Unquote. We bandos talk a good game about, as the George Parks starred thought suggests, if band people don't support each other, who the heck will? Happily, here's some evidence that we can walk the walk too. All right, let's grab another short break. And then I've got not an interview, but a profile by way of a memory. Okay, let's modulate and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, the only story you will hear on this episode that happened longer than 1 month ago. By the time you hear this, I will either be on the way to, in the midst of, or done with a Memorial Day parade in Nahant, Massachusetts, marching with my little alto sax in the Bridgewater Antiphonal Brass Society. I know what you're thinking. You will march, or are marching, or did march with an alto sax in a group with that name? Yes, my instrument was made of brass, whatever. I didn't see any mellophones in the band, though, so mid-range covered. And this weekend, I marched 2 parades. The other one, with the same group, was in Raynham, Massachusetts. And if you know where those 2 towns are, as well as the city in which I live, you will deduce that I will apparently drive almost anywhere for a parade gig. Yeah, I was one of those weirdos in high school and college who actually enjoyed parades. Just guide left and stay behind the cat in front of you, and there's no extra drill to learn. And on the side of the road, you see example after example of the current version of your little toddler self seeing a parade band maybe for the first time and having that seed planted. Maybe I could do that someday. Yep, little guy, you can. But much more importantly than any of that, again, it is Memorial Day weekend, which always kicks loose some memories. I marched 9 Memorial Day parades in various bands of the Wayland Public Schools. I attended some more Memorial Day parades so I could admire the snare drumming work of my middle school-age nephew and also to root on my high school-age niece, who did band as well. She was an oboist, and she wasn't bringing that thing out in the heat or spot showers, so one year she pretended to play trumpet, another year she pretended to be a flutist, and another year she helped carry the banner. She was no fool. In episode 61 of this podcast, I briefly described the Memorial Day tradition in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, where I taught at the high school for 9 years and therefore led the band during 9 indoor Friday morning before the holiday weekend Memorial Day assemblies. And more recently, I've marched with my new antiphonal brass friends, and so far with my community band, I've conducted at one Misty Town Memorial Day ceremony where the rain held off just long enough for us all to get everything and everybody loaded into cars before it became monsoon season. It is a day to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for Congress and country while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, and I've heard my share of 3-gun salutes, as well as all different lengths of commemorative speeches. I gotta say, Saturday's post-parade ceremony in Raynham featured politicians who actually knew how to keep it short and sweet. Well done, and I mean that. But the majority of my Memorial Day memories do come from the band activity part of it. And if there's one person of whom I am strongly reminded on Memorial Day morning every year, that would be a gentleman named William G. Zimmerman, Jr. Here's his biographical sketch. Bill Zimmerman was born in 1934 in Keene, New Hampshire. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of New Hampshire in 1957 and master's and doctoral degrees in education from the University of Miami in 1961 and 63, respectively. He served as supervisor of music in the Livermore Falls, Maine public schools from 1957 and 1959, taught social studies and K-12 music in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. He was superintendent of schools for the nation's first interstate school district in Hanover, New Hampshire, and Norwich, Vermont. He was a professor and chairman of the Department of Educational Administration at Northeastern University and also dean of Northeastern's Graduate School of Education. He served as chairman of the National Commission on Human Rights in Education and as the superintendent representative on the board of the Massachusetts Music Education Association. And the last stop on his career tour was his 23 years as superintendent of schools in Wayland, Massachusetts, where I grew up. Now, he was not my band director, except for 3 of my years as a Wayland Public Schools student. During that time, he was effectively my band director for about 4 rehearsals and 1 parade each year. I shall explain. I took up the trumpet at the beginning of the 4th grade, since that's the way we did it then and there. I moved over to the saxophone after the 7th grade, but during my elementary years, trumpet was it, or rather, cornet, which, until I got my first lesson book and read the cover, I thought was called a coronet, because that's what kind of a rock and roll Boston accent the guy from the music rental place had, the guy who was demonstrating all the instruments for us 3rd graders in June of 1975. The elementary schools in Wayland, 4 of them at the time, each put together their own 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade bands. Once a week, all the elementary band students would gather at the junior high school to rehearse the all-town band, but that was conducted by the junior high school band director, George Doran. Parenthetically, it occurs to me that I don't think I've yet waxed nostalgic about Mr. Doran on this podcast, and that needs to be rectified yesterday. I'll get to that very soon, I promise. Mostly I'm promising myself, and you'll just get hit by the shrapnel. Anyway, the town's Memorial Day parade always featured 3 and only 3 bands: the high school band, the junior high school band, and the elementary school band. Tiny challenge, there were only 2 school band directors in town, Mr. Doran at the junior high and, well, whoever was at the high school. It depended on the year. There were quite a few, I vaguely recall. I will now yield the floor in a time travel-y sort of way to my high school band director, Paul Livingston. Paul and I had a conversation that was the trio section in episode 40 back in November, and during that talk he described briefly the way Wayland could get 3 bands out on the street at once with only 2 band directors on the payroll.
My superintendencies were I started at Neshoba Regional in Massachusetts. Then I went to Walpole, and then I went to Littleton, and then I retired from Pentucket Regional. And I've been working to sustain music in all of those places.
The secret weapon of a public school system if the superintendent is involved with music somehow.
It's, again, having learned the superintendent in Wayland, Bill Zimmerman, who was outstanding, having been a music director, but a real educator. I remember him saying, well, the elementary band here marches on Memorial Day. And I said, well, that's quite unusual. How does that happen? He said, well, when I first came here, the community was discussing why nobody comes out to the Memorial Day parade, that idea of civics education and building community support and all. He said, I can probably help that in some ways. We put the elementary band out and you get some more parents and family and friends out there. And quite honestly, Bill Zimmerman, the superintendent, I was with the high school band because I was the high school band director and did the elementary program a little bit at middle school, but not a lot. And he actually ran the elementary band on Memorial Day with his trombone marching down.
For clarity, Paul arrived as Wayland High School's band director at the start of my sophomore year, fall of 1981, so he was not among the revolving door crew of directors of the 1970s. In fact, I'm willing to bet that he might have been, up to that point, Wayland's longest-serving high school band director. So, with that as backdrop, imagine, if you will, dozens, yes, at least 100 Wayland Elementary School band students gathering out behind the middle school on each of the 4 Wednesday afternoons before Memorial Day and forming a parade band, led by Dr. William G. Bill Zimmerman, Jr., Superintendent of Schools. If your head is spinning from imagining the sheer amount of noise and chaos, well, maybe it need not spin. Yes, 100-plus 4th through 6th graders will be a busy scene to start with, and then they unpack their instruments, and there's a chance that all hell will break loose. And if it rains on one of those Wednesdays, well, we'll just have to go rehearse in the gym. So yes, by all means, let's concentrate all that kerfuffle. But when the superintendent of schools is running the rehearsal, and he's already taught music, and he's a nice guy, but he can be firm when he needs to be, and he's the superintendent of schools, there are far fewer behavior issues than there might otherwise be. Let's just leave it at that. There were 2 musical things that had to be learned while on the move: the percussion cadence and a little arrangement of the Marines hymn. Each rank of little marchers was probably 5 or 6 people wide, so do the math, probably 12 or 13 ranks plus the percussion block in the center. So that was, from a parade perspective, a sizable band. And there were no other music teachers available to help, and certainly no student drum majors, so Dr. Zimmerman was on his own. But again, it was no problem from a behavior management standpoint, and musically, there were enough 6th graders to hold things together and herd the younger kids from a parade formation standpoint. And there stood Bill Zimmerman at the front of the block, not remotely needing a drum major. He was the drum major. He didn't have a twirling mace or a signal baton or anything like that. Well, that's not true. He had one thing that was something like that. He was, after all, a trombonist. In fact, for most of his time as Wayland's superintendent of schools, he was also an active gigging jazz trumpet and trombone player in the Boston and southern New Hampshire area. That was, in fact, an important factor in his courting of his eventual wife of 64 years, Ruth. When they were dating in the late 1950s, Ruth became the female vocalist with the Alan Kendall Orchestra of Keene, New Hampshire. And considering that Bill was playing in that orchestra every Friday and Saturday night, that was a guaranteed way of being in the same place at the same time. In fact, I remember seeing Bill Zimmerman performing numerous times as a ringer in the high school band and jazz ensemble. I'm pretty sure I remember him marching in at least one halftime show during my freshman year. That, among other things, will build your cred with students. And it's kind of cool and useful to see the superintendent of schools more often than just once a year at graduation. So all of us 4th, 5th, and 6th grade band kids were trained to keep an eye forward as we marched the Wayland Memorial Day Parade route. The cadence would be drummed at all times, except when there were spectators to play for, elementary band parents, and anybody else who was there as well, at which time we all looked forward and saw an upraised trombone slide tracing circles in the air. Guy didn't even need a whistle. He just slowly but firmly waved that trombone skyward, and the percussionists got to the end of their little 16-count cadence, fired up a roll-off, and then it was from the halls of Montezuma for the 1st or 5th or 900th time. That waving trombone was a Wayland town tradition. And when we got to the cemetery, which for little elementary legs was a pretty long parade route, we sat ourselves down on a hillside a few dozen yards from the podium, next to which the high school band stood at parade rest. We kept very quiet and respectful indeed. All the way through the speeches, all the way through the high school band's selection, all the way through the Gettysburg Address, and through taps, because Dr. Zimmerman was with us, which, again, tended to head off behavior management issues almost before they arose. All you needed was one Zimmerman side eye, and that was pretty much that. But we also were probably kind of quietly excited that the superintendent of schools was our band director. For 5 days every May, at least. And he wasn't faking it until he made it. He knew perfectly well what we were supposed to be doing, and he knew perfectly well how to teach us how to do it, and do it well. As well as 10, 11, and 12-year-olds can do that sort of stuff. Even now, during a Memorial Day parade, I'm looking forward and up, half expecting to see a trombone slide tracing circles in the air. Okay, we'll take a break, and then a story of a bit more recent vintage for you. Be right back. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is the other story of podcast project feedback that I feel like kind of goes above and beyond a little bit. There's a bit of background to this one. The short version is, since 1999, I've been a musical helper with a group called Bellingham Children's Theater. It's based in the Blackstone Valley here in southern central Massachusetts. Now, there is a Bellingham Children's Theater in Washington State, and it's a pretty mammoth operation. We aren't Mammoth here in Bellingham, Massachusetts, and we aren't that Bellingham Children's Theater, but we do a similar thing, I'm sure. Anyway, I've been some combination of piano accompanist, singing instructor, and playwright for the aforementioned quarter century, alongside the founders of the group with whom I go back even further than that. When I started with BCT, there would be 40 or 50 kids in the cast, grades 4 through 9. Thanks in part to a whole lot more children's theater-esque activities popping up in the vicinity of Bellingham over the course of the last few decades, so therefore there are more possible places for the theatrically inclined or curious youth of the Blackstone Valley to go now, Our casts tend to be closer to 10 or 12 kids nowadays, and this year we have kids who are participating into their sophomore or junior years in high school because they just like it. One of the folks who was either on stage or backstage for quite a few shows some years ago was a fellow named Thomas, who actually comes from a family of BCT participants. In fact, side note, one of the leads in the show we're rehearsing right now has a dad who was a lead in the very first show I ever played the piano for 26 years ago. Yeah, it's that kind of place, apparently. Anyway, my friend Thomas has since gone on to college, and when he comes home on a break, he'll pop into a weekday afternoon rehearsal on occasion to say hi. Our most recent conversation like this was back in March, and it was the usual, "So what's going on in your life?" deal. He described some of his studies, and I described BandWagon. We both professed interest in the other's current projects, and then it was time to go practice some songs. 2 or 3 weeks ago, Thomas shot me an email, and it said, in part, quote, "Hi, Rob. I just wanted to let you know I've been listening to your podcast. I've made it through the first 10 episodes or so, and I'm really enjoying it. The Star Trek reference 4 minutes into the first episode is all that's needed to identify this as a quintessentially Rob Hammerton podcast." Unquote. I am nothing if not transparent and predictable. Anyway, Thomas continued, quote, "Of course, the writing and production are top-notch right from the get-go, as expected, and I'm excited to see how things continue to evolve as I work my way through the rest of the episodes. My radio journalism class spent a day discussing podcasts, and I shared some excerpts from BandWagon. My professor said, and I quote, 'This podcast is so well done that I'll be recommending it to future students.' I suspect," said Thomas, "you'll be getting some new listeners." Unquote. I am more than humbled. I've heard those YouTube people, the ones whose whole gig is, "I can help you make a better podcast." I've heard them suggest that if you're doing a video podcast, you can get away with not great video quality, but you can't get away with bad audio. At the same time, my experience listening to podcasts has been you actually can get away with Zoom call quality audio if the content is engaging. I've heard interviews with people who sound like they're calling in from the International Space Station, but who are interesting enough that I don't care about that. At the same time, I suppose that one of my technical goals for BandWagon was to make it as listenable as possible, which means decent microphones and proper settings in Audacity, in the service of a listening experience that's closer to FM radio than AM radio while driving under a bridge kind of thing. And also, thanks in part to the particular podcasts whose production values have influenced me, if I can create some musical interludes and other audio jiggery-pokery that will enhance the product and make it seem as close to NPR as possible, all the better. But, again, as I teased in the opening moments of this episode, having an actual radio journalism professor pass that kind of kind judgment upon this little homemade media project, that is another thing entirely, and don't think I haven't felt pretty happy about hearing it, and, again, appropriately humbled. I shall endeavor to continue, I think. Okay, one last pause to catch my breath, and then we'll wrap things up for the week. Thanks for continuing to listen. Let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, a quote from the political commentator Michael Moore, which was passed on to me by 3 separate people this past week, all of them noting that it's a lesson from the music world that can apply to everyday life, and let's be honest, that's most of those lessons, but anyway. Because it's Michael Moore, and yeah, I have my issues with him, as much as I was entertained by his Fahrenheit 9/11 documentary all those years ago, and as useful as many of his other documentary films have been, there have been choices he's made of style and substance that have kept me from being a 100% slavish fanboy of his. Where was I? Oh yeah. Because it's Michael Moore, the quote talks about current events from a particular perspective, and no, this is not a political podcast. It continues not to be a political podcast, but I think the larger music class lesson still stands, and here it is. Quote, "This morning I have been pondering a nearly forgotten lesson I learned in high school music. Sometimes in band or choir, music requires players or singers to hold a note longer than they actually can hold a note. In those cases, we were taught to mindfully stagger when we took a breath so the sound appeared uninterrupted. Yesterday, I read an article that suggested that the administration's litany of bad executive orders is a way of giving us protest fatigue. We will literally lose our will to continue the fight in the face of the onslaught of negative action. Let's remember music. Take a breath. The rest of the chorus will sing, the rest of the band will play. And rejoin so others can breathe. Together, we can sustain a very long, beautiful song for a very, very long time. You don't have to do it all, but you must add your voice to the song. With special love to all the musicians and music teachers in my life. Signed, Michael Moore. Unquote. Stagger your breathing, even you, percussionists, so that you won't stagger from not breathing. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, with source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at the pod's website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using the email address heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that I do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to this week's news items and conversation topics can be found in our show notes, as can a link to BandWagon's merch store thanks to the good folks at TeePublic. And they've got a sale running again. It's going until the end of today, the 26th, just in case you're interested. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, please do share it in the direction of someone whom you think might not be a listener yet. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with the pod every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton, and remember, hang up your uniform when you get home.